Welcome all. This is the KubeVirt community meeting, June 6th, or excuse me, June 19th, 2019. And the first topic on our agenda is container disk changes, and I'll turn it over to David Vossel.
Hey, yeah. I mean, Roman, you're doing most of the work here. I can talk about it, or did you want to talk about it?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, me. Okay. So there's two changes coming down the pipe, and Roman's doing both of them right now. But the biggest one is with the container disk. In the past, we've always done this copy of the image from the container image to the local pod and shared that between the virtual machine and the host. So what that means is that we always have to make a copy of the container locally to be used by the virtual machine, which is duplication. And also the image could be huge, so it could be a large copy that's involved. So one of the changes we're working on right now is the ability to have zero copy for container images, for container disk images. So what this would mean is you download the container disk once onto your host, and it could be used by lots of virtual machines, and we'd actually have a backing file for any changes potentially. So that would be way more efficient with local storage usage on the host, and it would be more efficient for actually starting the virtual machine as well. The second change, what was the second change, Roman? It was what you were working on. Oh, yeah, we're getting rid of the bash script. Is that the second one?
The second change mostly is that you can base your image or your container disk on a Scratch Docker image. So right now we have some basic logic included in the image, and you have to base your container disk image on our base image, but that's not removed then. You just take a Scratch image and copy over your disk, and that's it.
Right. So there's no more requirements for what's actually in the container disk image. You can just put your image in, and that's it. It can be just a totally blank container image other than that. So those are the two changes coming down the pipeline. And this should make the container disk feature actually be something that is usable in production rather than it started out as kind of this development thing where we need a way to easily distribute disks for virtual machines, and now it's actually something that we perceive as being useful in production.
Just a comment, if I could, or a bit of a question. So if you're not aware, CDI supports the container disk format as well. And what we do is we import the container using Scopio and copy the disk image into a persistent volume claim so that it can be persisted across VM starts. Just checking here to make sure that we haven't changed any of the rules about where the image should be located, the name of the image, or any other of those things. The changes that you mentioned sound like they won't impact CDI, but I'm just checking on that.
Yeah, the location where you put the image inside the container is still the same. I guess that's the only important part for you.
Yeah, okay. So just a quick reminder that there is a sort of another project that's aligning to this format. So it's good to hear about this. Thanks.
I think it would be wise for us to go ahead and introduce a functional test to verify that we don't break anything like that as well. I'd be surprised if we did, but I think it belongs in our functional test.
Yeah, so basically making one explicit that we are testing this out of the tests which we have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Oh yeah, and finally the change is also backward compatible. When you use old container disks, you can still use them. That doesn't have any impact at all. We just continue working.
Yeah, and feeding off that, it's also we're increasing the security of container disks as well. People can't execute arbitrary code within their container disks anymore, which was one of the concerns that we had. Now we ignore whatever's in there. No code is actually being run that's being shipped with the container disk image anymore. We're injecting our own binary in there to execute. So people can't run whatever they want anymore as the entry point. I think that covers it.
Okay, without any further questions then, the next topic is REST API test coverage, and I'll turn it over to Marcin.
Okay, hi guys. So I'm still looking for more reviewers there. I publish new OpenShift images. Currently, there are some problems because I see my tests are failing and I need to resolve this problem. Anyway, yesterday I was able to get first full coverage report. So it seems we have 20% coverage around that value. And I'm talking about all endpoints. And when we are talking about only virtual machine instances, it's about 76%, something like this. When I resolve this issue, I will share this report to you guys. And next steps are
One question here.
Yeah.
Is this running all tests, including Malthus lanes and everything?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for each lane, we have separate REST API coverage right now. Mm-hmm. But it's just after test cleanup, I run this test from the test, after test cleanup, I run coverage from test level. So next steps is to integrate it with Pro. So when there is this phase after test cleanup, I run my tool.
Okay, great. And what I wanted to know is, so, I mean, you can't run with one cluster all tests right now, right? So did you run all lanes and then calculate the overall outcome, or?
No, that was for each lane. Each calculation was for each lane.
So the 76% is from the lane with the highest coverage?
Yeah, it's from OpenShift 3.11.0.
Okay. So I just wanted to highlight that it needs to be combined. For instance, we can't test all Malthus network configurations and so on, which means it's all done. Okay, thank you for the. Sounds great what you're doing so far.
Yeah, that really sounds great, and I'm also interested to see the report because I would really like to understand like how the 20% come up. But that will, I mean, we can look at that once we publish the report. Really cool work. Looking forward to that.
Cool. So,
sorry. Just highlighting Adam John. I think that's also interesting for other projects which are using custom resources because it's agnostic to the underlying resource as long as the open APIs used to find fields, and you can effectively understand how many of my fields are covered by my functional and unit testing. If that's correct, right, Martin?
Yep. I want to just add one more thing that probably in the near future I will move this code to separate repo. It would be the best. And the report maybe doesn't look nice right now. I mean, I'm talking about user interface, but it's gonna change as well. So that's it from my side.
All right, without any other questions, next topic is masquerading the virtual machine network interface, and I'll turn that over to Peter Horacek.
Right. Hello. So there was some work done by Sebastian. We had the binding mechanism for the default bot interface was bridge until now, but we had some issues with that. Specifically one bug where after restart of kubelet, we lost connection to the VM. So we decided to change the default binding mechanism for bot interface to Masquerade, which solves this problem. We switched our functional test to use the Masquerade by default. And there was a PR that fixed the Masquerade binding mechanism to align with bot traffic, kind of. Basically, we just sent all ports from the bot to the VM by default. So yeah, in short, that's that.
So I'm confused. Usually when you're masquerading, all outbound traffic is masqueraded, and then related or established traffic is forwarded back to the source. It sounds like what you just said was that all traffic inbound would be forwarded to the VM.
Yeah, and until unless you explicitly say that it shouldn't be, I think that everything will be, forwarded. But I wasn't working on the PR, so I cannot say that 100% sure.
Why do we call it Masquerade instead of Nat?
I don't remember why we chose the name.
I think they're the same thing. So NAT usually means static routing, but in this case, because it's masquerading, you're saying everything. But I'm confused as why it's called Masquerade if we're routing all inbound traffic. That doesn't make sense.
I have another question. Apart from the name, and that is we had a pull request open which was trying to fix the issue when the kubelet restarts. So we now still have the bug on the pod network interface. Is that going to be fixed too?
Well, it could be. We need to fix tests in that PR, and I haven't got to it yet, although promised several times. And
but we will fix it, right?
Well, eventually, yes. Yes.
It's still the default in KubeVirt, as far as I know. Or did we number?
I'm not sure. We plan to change the default in UI to use the bridge. The masquerade as well as a default. Not only as a default, as the only option. But again, to be safe, we should fix it and finish the PR. And for the name, I mean, we should look back at the original PR if there was any discussion about that. I'm not aware of it.
So let me just highlight that for other people here in the call, that one difference is that that you don't have the pod IP anymore inside the VM, right? So that might be an issue for some use cases. So
that's a pretty big issue, yeah, especially for clustering use cases. So people need to be able to register potentially their IP address with the service, and that to be reachable. So if they don't know what their IP address is, then, or they all look the exact same, it's going to cause unexpected behavior for some applications.
Well, if you address by pod address and not by service, then yes. But I mean, you should use the service IP of something, right?
Not necessarily. So an application perhaps starts within the virtual machine and it sees its own internal IP address, the one that's bound to or whatever, and it would potentially register that by talking to an outbound service, like a database or something, and say, this is how you can reach.
Yeah. Well...
we were also discussing some ways with traffic control or so on to kind of keep the IP inside the VM too, so that it looks for the VM like it has the same IP, but you do some magic in the container. Maybe you can also have a look into that one. Apart from that, it looks like we will need both. And what I just want to highlight is I want that bug, if possible, also fixed on the on the kubelet. That's on the normal network interface. That's my main point.
Yeah, I may have lied to you. I'm not 100% sure about like all this ground masquerade. You may need to wait for Sebastian to tell you details and the truth.
Yeah, I'm still unclear on it exactly. So it was a MAC address collision or something that was causing this?
No. The problem why we switched. Are you asking about problem with the restart, right?
I'm asking about why we had to switch to masquerade. It had to do with the MAC address, from what I understood.
So when you set up the interface in the pod, or kubelet sets up the interface in the pod, it checks whether the IP address and the interface is there, and it is there when the pod is starting. But then we take over the IP address and move it into the VM, so it's not there anymore. Then you restart kubelet, and it has this health check where after restart, it iterates all containers, all pods, and rechecks the IP address, which is not there anymore. It's in the VM.
Okay, and then it considers the pod failed at that point?
Yes. So, and the workaround in our PR was that we renamed the original interface. We created a dummy interface with the original name of the original one and gave it an IP address. that's not reachable from anywhere, but it satisfies the check. Ugly workaround, but I think it worked.
In the case of Multis, is it checking for both IP? Like, if, let's say, for example, there's 2 IP addresses. Do you know if it's checking for both, or?
No, I mean, KubeVirt doesn't know about Multis and about secondary IP addresses. All it knows about is the primary one.
So potentially we could support this still with Multis by giving multiple. I don't know. I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, for the secondary interface, it's all good. And we have problem just with the primary one since it's like checked by a kubelet.
Okay. This might be something that's worth bringing to the upstream Kubernetes community to, talk about our use case, and maybe we can work something out in the long term.
I mean,
it would be at least worth opening the discussion.
Yeah,
it might get shut down immediately.
It makes sense that it fails. I mean, the IP address is not there anymore, and the pod is not reachable. So, what do you do? I don't know.
Okay. Well, good overview. I don't have anything else.
Sorry, could you? Yeah, sorry, Pedro. Could you summarize the issue in a sentence? I missed the beginning.
Which issue? The restart one?
Oh, I thought it was just one issue that was discussed in the last minute.
Yeah, like the reason why we switched to Masquerade, and that's that after kubelet, after restart, kubelet iterates all pods and it checks whether they still have their IP addresses that were reported the last time. And that fails if we take over the IP address and move it to the VM.
Oh, yeah. Actually, with Masquerade, do we still look at moving the IP address, or does it get a different IP address?
It gets a different one. The IP address stays on the pod interface.
Great. Yeah. For the pod interface, I would actually make that the general norm, that for the pod interface, we never, ever, with any implementation, move the IP to the VM.
Well, then we cannot have the bridge implementation, which...
I understand. Which I would like to avoid in general. I mean, I would like to deprecate it for, let's say, KubeVirt 2, but yeah, not right now.
And sorry to drag this on further, but part of this is my own ignorance. But I'm wondering, as part of these changes, will it be possible for QEMU to use the control plane, like the pod's IP address, for example, to communicate with a remote block device?
Yeah, sure. I think so, because the original reason to implement Masquerade was to support sidecars. So okay. I guess it would allow you to use the IP address for QEMU or whatnot.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and that is actually why I would go with saying that we eliminate all other methods on the pod interface, because currently, Adam, the problem is we cannot expect it because somebody can still use the bridge network. So that is why I was thinking about down the road, but really, KubeVirt 2 or something like that, to just permit something like Slurp or Masquerade on the pod network, because then we can assume that the pod will always have network connectivity.
Yep. Yeah, because we're looking at basically introducing a packaging method and an entirely new disk type, which could behave like a CD-ROM using a network attached block device. But yeah, we would depend on that being reliably usable. So, okay, cool.
And also, if we remove the interface or the IP from the interface, it may work, but there is no guarantee that it will work. I mean, it depends on the implementation on kubelet. But the requirement of Kubernetes is that the pod is reachable and that there is an IP address to do that.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right, then I go to the another networking bullet point, bridge instead of OVS. So with OKD, we decided that we want to switch to Linux Bridge CNI as the default L2 CNI plugin. The reason being that it's easier to set up a Linux bridge on the OKD host, since it has no dependencies, unlike the OVS, which requires you to have a daemon, loaded kernel modules, and so on. So yeah, we are switching even in the functional test of KubeVirt from OVS to Linux bridge. And if you want to install Linux bridge CNI and marker on your Kubernetes setup, you can use network guidance operator, which ships this CNI plugin.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the plugin called?
It's just Linux bridge CNI.
Got it. Okay.
All right.
All right. If there's no more questions, we're looking at moving the API version to G1 or to V1 for GA, and I'll turn it over to David.
Yeah. So there's not a whole lot here, but I just wanted to let everyone know that right now our API for like virtual machines and virtual machine instances is V1 Alpha 3, and we've been progressing it through the past couple of years, and every time we progress it, it means that it's not backwards compatible with the previous one. We think we're at the point where we like our API and that it's stable, and we would have already moved it to something like a V1 beta one, but we haven't had the feature set in Kubernetes until recently to progress our API. So we feel like we're at the point where we want to make our API generally available and market as V1. So we're going to be skipping beta, and the idea is we're going to jump directly from V1 Alpha 3 to V1, and this change is going to be completely backwards compatible with the previous V1 Alpha 3 API. So that API isn't going anywhere. It's still available. Virtual machines started with that, and then say you update to a new version of KubeVirt that supports the new V1 Alpha. Everything's still going to work fine. So this change is coming. Once we hit V1, that means we're committed to supporting this API without backwards incompatible changes. Backwards incompatible change is modifying a field or removing a field. A compatible change is additions to the API. So we're still going to allow additions to the API. We're just saying that we're not going to mutate any fields, rename them, or delete them without going to like a V2 someday. But V1, I think we're going to say that's forever, just like Kubernetes is doing. And we have no plans to not support anything that exists today. So I'm working on that change now. It should land, the pull request should land this week sometime, along with a proposal for what's happening for discussion. So if anyone has any problems with the API, bring it up now, because we're pretty much committing to it at this point. The one limitation this has, and I'll bring it up in the proposal, is that we have to use Kubernetes 1.11 or greater. We can't use Kubernetes 1.10 or less, because it doesn't have the support for multiple versions for custom resource definitions. So that's the only limitation we really have. That's it.
So to be clear, you said that we're going to continue to support V1 Alpha 3 as well as V1 going forward?
They're the same thing.
The follow-up is that is there a point where we're going to sunset V1 Alpha 3? Probably not.
I think we'll hold on to it forever because it's completely an alias for V1. They're the same thing, effectively. So as long as V1's supported, don't see any reason for us to remove V1 Alpha 3.
Hey, Francesco here. I have a question about the AP stability. I'm not sure this is the right place, but still. So are we happy about the state of the Hyper-V API? Because last time we touched the subject, we pretty much, well, it is pretty low level and it exposes quite a lot of flags. So since this is pretty much the last chance to review it, I'm bringing this up.
Did you have a specific idea of what you would like to see change with that, or I haven't given it much thought?
No. I don't have any strong opinion on that. I see why it is like that, but it feels somehow, well, my own very gut feeling is that is pretty low level, and it is somehow at odds to other component of the API. But I don't have a list of complaints or any suggestion. I would just like to bring this up because I don't want this to be to go unnoticed. But maybe I'll start an email thread. Is it a better place to discuss?
Yeah, maybe bring it up in
Okay.
in the discussion. I'll try to. Here's what I'll do. I'll post to KubeVirt Devel once I post the pull requests, and we can have the discussion there. So we're not locked into never making a change to our API. It's that changes in the future will require, if they're not backwards compatible, will require conversion between our APIs. And that's something that we'll probably need to push out for a year or so, because that's something that just recently got released with Kubernetes. So if we make backwards and compatible changes, even to V1 Alpha 3 at this point, because we're pretty much committed to that, we're going to have to drop support for older Kubernetes versions. I believe 1.13 is the most recent Kubernetes version that supports conversion. But that's a discussion worth having and bringing up.
Okay, works for me. Thank you.
And in general, I mean, Kubernetes supports V1 now since they are V1, and there's still no V2. So I guess we should be able to live with that then for a longer time period, right?
We're our own project, whatever makes sense for us.
Yeah, definitely. I just meant that you can still have a lot of possibilities to shape the API, even if you're already V1.
Right.
All right, so next topic, changing gears, Virt control available via Crew, and I'll turn it over to Daniel Hiller.
Yeah, hey folks. Yeah, we've released the Crew installation of Virt control for 0.18.1 last week, I think. We have a couple of documentation updates. Most of them are merged, but the one is still in progress because there is an upstream test failing, I think. Yeah, what's still pending is that we still don't respect the base name of the Virt kernel binary. That's still to do. And we had a discussion about whether the repo where the binaries are created should either be moved into the KubeVirt org or probably completely integrated into KubeVirt. I think my personal opinion is about that we might be more flexible to leave it in a separate repository, but I think the visibility aspect of the repo being moved into the KubeVirt org might be good. But well, I'm open to everything. So yeah, that's everything for me. Thank you.
One question here, can this plug-in mechanism thing completely be generated automatically on every release?
I'm sorry, I didn't get you.
So when we do new KubeVirt release, and you want to update virtctl then in the plugin system, what do you have to do?
Actually, at the moment, the most steps are automated, but not triggered. So I've set up a couple of bash scripts which are generating the packages. And what is still done manually is there is a GitHub release prepared and a Crew like a YAML file has to be put against into the pull request against the Crew index where the new plugin gets published then. So to be automated, I think we have two options, I would say. First one would be to completely integrate it into the KubeVirt release process. But the second would be using probably GitHub webhooks. Like when a release is created in the GitHub, the KubeVirt repository, so we could let trigger the other build probably, like we would automate the rest of the steps, but in a different repo. So did that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Do you if we add new commands to virtctl? I just remember from the last plugin systems which were proposed for Kubernetes, you always had to generate some description files so that commands could be discovered and so on. Is something like this still necessary?
No, not that I know, because just the new plugin mechanism just takes the binary and uses it. So you don't have to do anything. It just forwards it to the binary. So like you just do kubectl virt and then whatever command you do, and you don't have to describe anything. You can use a shell script. You can use another binary. It doesn't matter.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. Also doesn't sound like too much needs to be done to have that automated, as you already said. I'm not sure if it's... so in the past, we always decided to have something like this in KubeVirt, the main repo. I would still keep it there, put it there for simplicity, but I don't know what other things.
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't get that much response. I wrote a mail to the KubeVirt dev mailing list, but I didn't get much response except from Splinters, who opened the discussion whether repo should be moved or integrated. So I don't know what to do. Should I send some reminder emails so that probably a couple of other guys might chime in?
I don't know. I can definitely look up the email and write there that I would prefer having it integrated and just when we do a tag that it just gets updated.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So next topic is capabilities for persistent volume claims by Adam.
Yeah, so this is kind of an issue that we're working on that's a bit cross-cutting across the entire KubeVirt. And basically what exists here is that your capabilities of your PVC, what you can do with it varies based on the storage class and the underlying provisioner that you have. So for example, the two main ones are basically your access mode, which is it can be read-write once, read-only many, or read-write many. And that depends on what the underlying storage supports, and also whether the underlying storage can support a volume mode of block or the default only, which is file. So you have a couple of different options here. The real problem we run into is with something like a UI that's trying to walk a user through an easy process to create a virtual machine, which access mode, it's a required parameter on the PVC, which access mode should be chosen by the UI. It's not something I think we should bother users with. And that access mode has implications on what features we can support, for example, whether live migration will be available for that virtual machine. So it's pretty important, and again, with the volume mode. So we're trying to figure out how to solve this problem, make it easier for users. One of the ideas that we've had is to create a new CRD called KubeVirt Storage Capabilities, which would be a CR that basically connects the capabilities that we know a storage class can support with that storage class. So this would be an object that the UI could reference when deciding which options to display to users and things like that. It could be extended in the future to say that, oh, by the way, this storage class would give you snapshot support. So we could integrate with that. It would be a single stop maybe for the UI to understand what storage is capable of doing. So we're looking at this. We're trying to figure out which project within KubeVirt should own it. I think at this point we're leaning towards CDI just because it kind of seems obvious being storage related, but I'm not exactly sure that's the right decision. So more to come on this one. I just wanted to give a heads up because it really is, I think, starting to bite us, especially as we try to work with local storage and also kind of shared storage such as Ceph. And so we're starting to hit this for real now. Any questions for me on this one? Or?
Yeah, question for you. In terms of CDI being the owner, are there storage types that the UI would be concerned with that don't fall underneath CDI?
Yeah, it's a good question. So basically, having CDI own this would be cementing the idea that CDI really should come along with KubeVirt and further bolstering the argument that they're one and the same. What we would do, one of the benefits to pairing it with CDI would be that you could have some nice data volume integrations. For example, we could make the UI not care about this at all by making access mode and volume mode completely optional fields in the PVC spec of the data volume. And then the data volume could actually controller could go and figure out what those values should be based on what's been configured in the cluster with those capabilities CRs. So that would be one reason to integrate it there. Right now, the UI should be creating data volumes in the wizards. So it implies that CDI already exists there. If you're going to create your own PVCs, then you might have to know what those should be. I guess a contrarian argument would be in the templates like that are being provided for as part of KubeVirt, those, if they're specifying any data volume templates, for example, those would need to have the appropriate values filled in based on the storage class. There'd be like a bit of dynamic processing there that needs to be thought about. So I don't know if that answered it for you. So the UI would be the main benefactor of this because if you're creating objects by yourself in the cluster, you would, of course, have your own workload for figuring that out potentially in terms of which values to specify. So the UI would be the main beneficiary of this.
Okay, without any questions or discussion, moving on to the next is Katacoda, and I will turn it over to Kareem.
Thank you, Stu, for handing it to me, but as I said earlier, I have little to say about it. I know Pablo, which is part of our community team, is working on trying to have a Katacoda repository enabled, and the question that we are having is where we want to actually host it. So basically, we can either try to do it at learn.openshift.com, which is kind of a product thing, so we don't know, or we can otherwise have people put their GitHub, not credentials, just authorize the application and do it this way. So I believe the question was which approach we should have, and personally, I think that we should go with the GitHub approach. I don't know what users wanting to try Katacoda or KubeVirt through Katacoda would think. So we would like to get your feedback on it. Stuart, in particular.
All right, so I'm not hearing a lot of discussion or questions on this. Would this maybe be better for a mailing list discussion?
Yeah, we can go this way. I guess probably the fact that nobody is really answering that they don't care, which is fine, you know, because it means that we can go either way. So we take note of that. Thank you, Stu.
All right, and the next topic is testing of Windows images.
Right. So Windows tests are part of common templates, which contains templates for different operating systems. These tests should help us to test if Windows templates works and VMs can boot without any issues. For now, we have tests for Windows 2016, which works fine, and the rest tests for Windows 2012 and Windows 10 will be finished in the near future. That's all from me.
All right, any questions? All right, moving on to migration policies by Francisco.
Hey everyone. So this is actually to present the concept. Migration policies are a feature. It is added to KubeVirt, and I was wondering if and how it should be introduced in KubeVirt. I had a quick look at the issues and at the PRs. It seems no one is working. So here I am proposing for the addition, because I think this is a cool feature to have. And before to let the others speak, I would like to point out that this is not a way to sneak in a scripting language or any fancy stuff inside the KubeVirt core. Also, maybe it's better if I quickly remind what migration policies are, because maybe not everyone has had the chance to look at the email. Migration policies are basically a configuration of a configurable way to monitor the migration progress, because unfortunately migration is not something that one can fire and forget. Having a migration successfully complete is something that varies wildly with respect to the VM workload. So in KubeVirt, back in time, we figured out that having a different way to manage and help the migration improve depending on the workload and making it configurable, it is something that people may benefit from. So this level of configuration is, we believe, well, speaking about KubeVirt, is we believe the right spot between the configurability and the easy to use. You set the migration policy of VM to a choice you are provided for, and you can add your own, but again, it is simple enough to be used without many things to do, but yet powerful enough.
Is this something you do in KubeVirt based on a set of nodes or specific nodes, or is it a cluster-wide thing?
It is a cluster-wide thing, meaning the policies are cluster objects, but you set per VM.
Okay, so when you create a migration, you select one of the policies for this migration?
Yes, you opt in. You can have the default behavior, or you can have a policy which is a policy. Well, the simplest policy would be something like, if you do too many steps for some definition of too many, like memory iteration, you know. If you, for example, reach the 5th memory iteration, okay, enable post copy and make it converge.
So the policies are not overlapping in this sense. Like I can have one virtual machine which has a profile where it will enable auto converge after it doesn't converge after some time, and I can have another VM which wants more bandwidth on transfers, and this all works in parallel, or?
In KubeVirt, we don't have like that, but we can have like that. Basically, everything you can configure at the libvirt migration API, we made it possible to be set in a policy. So yes, we can.
Okay, so what I'm interested in is to find out. I've read the feature page, by the way. What I'm interested in to find out is what exactly. On which spots, not what you can do, but what you are doing. Mm-hmm. I couldn't fully understand it, to be honest. It looked like kind of, okay, I can specify a policy for the whole cluster, but now you say that you can specify it per VM. And this just gives me opens the questions for me then, what can you configure there? Because, for instance, I could select one policy for VMA where I say it should migrate with 30 Mbit, and the other one should have a bandwidth of 60 Mbit. Mm-hmm. How can they not intervene with each other or overlap, or how is that even possible? Just what they do.
this is actually was the reason why we I'm not completely sure, but the bandwidth management per se was put outside of the policy, and we didn't made it inside in the first implementation. It was enforced by VDSM in KubeVirt. And what we made possible to be set in the policy was flags like when to kick in the post-scope immigration and the auto-convergence flag and all the other fancy flag the immigration had.
Yeah, we just don't have a post-copy with our implementation at the moment.
Okay. That could be, well, another good effect of this effort could be that we can have, since we need a way to report the migration, the migration progress for implementing the policies, we can just start doing this reporting, having metrics about the migration state, like, for example, memory iteration. The drawback I see is, and we can expose them to, for example, to UI. The drawback I see is that basically all the migration indicators we could think of were pretty low level and somehow hard to understand for users.
Okay, so here is one last question regarding to that. Is that something which the admin does on migrations, or is this something where the user then says, okay, this is a database which, I don't know, is hard to migrate because of a lot of writes, and I can live with some performance degradation through migration for as long as it migrates, and they give it a special policy? Or is this something which the admin kind of does?
In KubeVirt, it was a VM property, so anyone that could edit VMs could change it. For KubeVirt, I don't really have a thought of it yet. So we can think of how we can want to behave in KubeVirt.
So something like this sounds reasonable in general. I would be very interested in seeing why you're offering the users and what these policies and what you offer them in the policies, to understand how it's used then in practice. But in general, could be useful, I guess. It's just that we still have not much data from people which are using migrations and what they need and what not.
I'm totally fine with that. It's not something that it will happen soon. I'm indeed most interested in people and feedback from you guys. So, but it is something we will like to do eventually.
David, Vladek, for instance, what do you guys think?
Yeah, we were discussing, I think, different migration policies. Not exactly specifically about this, what Francesco is talking about. But yeah, I mean, it's something valid. Maybe in the future when we'll have post-migration will be even more attractive.
All right. Next topic is releasing the cloud provider, and I'll turn it over to Daniel Gonzalez.
Yeah, so this is more kinds of a heads up. So we have the KubeVirt cloud provider repository in the KubeVirt organization for quite some time now, but we never did an official release or so of it. So there are currently no Docker images or so that you can just consume. And we discussed this in Barcelona, so the idea of doing an official release. And we agreed that as a first step, I would need to implement some integration tests and integrate them with the CI pipeline. Yeah, and I just wanted to give a head up that I managed to look in this topic now this week, and I will probably reach out next week for some assistance on how this could be integrated in the CI, if it even makes sense. Yeah.
Sounds great. I'm happy to help if you need something.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. You already said that in Barcelona, and yeah, I will reach out to you then.
All right, next topic. Mark, the PR for KubeVirt version 0.18.1 was released a few minutes ago. Turn it over to you.
Yes, you almost said everything. The PR was merged, and that means that within the next few hours, I don't know exactly how much this is synchronized, KubeVirt version 0.18.1 will be available on Operator Hub.io. Who is not familiar with that, Operator Hub.io provides an easy way to install operators on upstream Kubernetes by just installing one manifest for OLM and everything, the Operator Lifecycle Manager, and then you have another manifest for creating the subscription for example given the KubeVirt operator. That's it.
Actually, Mark, one question here. I think we don't need to tackle it right now, but one question that actually emerges is now that we support upgrades in KubeVirt, how can we get the operator to do it that way, right? I mean, did you ever test that? You know, how it behaves if you update KubeVirt through OLM, if that will actually trigger an upgrade of KubeVirt?
We have tests of updates since a short while, created by David, but we don't have tests yet for updates via OLM.
Yeah, and I wonder if we should.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if they should be in the main repository or elsewhere. But in general, I wonder if the OLM flow would trigger the KubeVirt update. That is what I wonder. But we can take that offline.
It can. So
it can.
Default, yes. By default, it will actually.
Will it? Oh.
If you don't explicitly define the version tag and the version registry that you want to install KubeVirt with in the KubeVirt custom resource, then it's going to tie it directly to the operator. So if OLM updates the operator, then that means that KubeVirt gets updated.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just wonder if we tested that flow. But cool. Yeah, nice.
That flow works. Taking OLM out of the picture, the flow of updating the operator, triggering the automatic update of KubeVirt is something that we test.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and as soon as we have the OKG provider in our KubeVirt CI, I will also add a tester with OLM.
You don't need OKD for it. You can install OLM just in Kubernetes or OS free. Just saying.
Yeah, but we want to test on OKD anyway, and there we have it all integrated, and so.
Yeah, understood.
But thanks for heads up.
All right, we're running very short on time, so going to jump right to the open floor section. First topic is the Container Days I/O workshop. And I'm not sure who owns this topic.
It's me. I just found the unmute button. So just heads up, there will be a few of us. Mark, Sebastian, not from Lutz, will be at the Container Days I/O workshop in Hamburg. It's sold out, but we'll still be around. So in case you want to catch us there. On the same page, I see that the KubeVirt tutorial, which will be used there, is now also available on the KubeVirt org, which might be a good thing if you want to onboard somebody from your company to work with KubeVirt. Cool to see that contribution. Kudos to Pep if you're around, right? Second thing is KVM Forum and Open Source Summit. So KVM Forum is actually a little bit late because the CFP closed last week. But Open Source Summit, CFP is open until July the 1st. So please consider it's in somewhere in France. So if you want to have a nice trip to France and you want to speak about KubeVirt, then consider submitting something there about KubeVirt. I think KubeVirt has a chance because in the end we're a strong user of KVM, right? And for Open Source Summit, they are also still focused on virtualization and Kubernetes. So in what sweeter spot could we be to be accepted there? Cool. That was it from my side.
Thank you for that. Are there any more topics to raise today? All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great week.
Thanks to you as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.